Have you ever found yourself questioning your very reason for existence in this world? Perhaps it's the relentless challenge of making ends meet, the ache of broken relationships, or the silent fear that peace, health, or happiness will never truly be within your reach. You're not alone. Millions of people around the world are crying out for a breakthrough, yearning for a way to escape the overwhelming weight they carry. And let me tell you, it's not your fault. Life's challenges can feel insurmountable, and the struggles you face often come from forces beyond your control. But there is hope, and there is a way forward. In the next few moments, you're going to uncover a hidden, divine prayer, one blessed by the Holy Spirit that holds the extraordinary power to completely transform your life. What if I told you that this sacred and anointed path could unlock the floodgates of God's blessings and pour His unlimited abundance into every area of your life, your finances, your health, your relationships, and even your spiritual walk? It may sound too good to be true, but the truth is, this prayer has been quietly working miracles for those who dare to believe. And now it's your turn to experience it. And here's the best part. It's simpler than you think. By the time you finish watching this short video, you'll understand exactly how to activate this life-changing prayer. Just like it did for me, this prayer can invite God's miracles into your life in ways you never imagined. Are you ready to take the first step toward the breakthrough you've been praying for? Let's begin. Hello, my name is Tom Hopper, and a year ago I was living a nightmare. I grew up in a small, God-fearing town where faith was strong, but poverty was stronger. My parents were humble people who worked tirelessly. My father is a mechanic, my mother cleaning houses, but despite their sacrifices, there was never enough money to cover the basics. Dinner was often just bread and beans, and the electricity being cut off was so routine, we kept candles ready at all times. As I grew older, I swore I would break free from this cycle. I told myself, if I work harder, pray louder, and do everything right, God will surely bless me. But life had other plans. I got married young, full of hope and big dreams for the future. I promised my wife we would never have to live like my parents did. But no matter how hard I worked, it seemed like the harder life pushed back. The bills weren't just piling up, they were suffocating us. Our landlord called us almost daily, demanding the overdue rent. One month when we couldn't pay, she shut off the water supply as a reminder to prioritize her payment. We were forced to haul buckets of water from a nearby park fountain just to bathe and cook. The strain of financial stress weighed heavily on my marriage. My wife and I argued constantly, not because we didn't love each other, but because we didn't know how we'd make it through another month. To make matters worse, my health began to fail. Years of stress and sleepless nights caught up to me, and I started experiencing debilitating migraines that left me unable to work some days. But the darkest blow came when my wife was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. I remember sitting with her in that cold, sterile doctor's office, hearing the words that shattered our world. We couldn't afford the treatments she needed. Every time I looked at her, I felt like I was failing her. Failing as a husband, failing as a man. We fell behind on everything: rent, utilities, even groceries. There were nights when we had nothing to eat but a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. I'll never forget the humiliation of pawning my wedding ring just to buy her medication. One night, as I sat alone in our darkened apartment, staring at an eviction notice taped to the door, I hit rock bottom. The landlord had given us 3 days to leave, and I had no idea where we would go. My wife was too sick to move, and I couldn't see any way out. I grabbed my Bible, clutching it like a lifeline, and fell to my knees. I broke down as I cried out in desperation, "Lord, why have you forsaken me? What have I done to deserve this? I've tried everything. Please, God, show me a way out." I wept until I couldn't cry anymore, my body shaking, my spirit utterly broken. That night, I thought my cries went unheard. But little did I know, God had already set a plan in motion to turn my life around. A week later, worn down by despair and the weight of unanswered prayers, I found myself wandering aimlessly through the streets. I wasn't searching for anything specific, just a shred of relief from the turmoil that had overtaken my heart. As I turned a corner, I noticed a small chapel nestled at the end of a narrow cobblestone street. It wasn't grand or adorned with opulence, just a modest, quiet place with weathered wooden doors and a simple cross perched above them. Yet the moment I stepped inside, I felt a presence so peaceful it was as if God himself had drawn me there. The air was still, save for the gentle flicker of candles that cast a warm glow on the altar. I slipped into the last pew, bowed my head and whispered, "Lord, if you're still listening, please. I can't do this on my own." My words hung in the silence, and for a moment I wondered if anyone, let alone God, had heard them. As I sat there drowning in my thoughts, an elderly man moved quietly through the chapel, lighting a candle at the altar. He turned toward me, his face radiant with a serenity that seemed untouched by the burdens of this world. He walked toward me slowly, his steps deliberate and unhurried. "You look troubled, son," he said, his voice calm and steady, like a river flowing through the storm inside me. "God brought you here for a reason." I nodded, but his words felt distant. How could my suffering possibly be part of a divine plan? The man introduced himself as Brother James, a traveling monk who had dedicated his life to prayer and helping those who had lost their way. There was something about him, something almost otherworldly, as though he carried with him the presence of heaven itself. With trembling hands and a heart full of despair, I poured out my story. I told him everything. The landlord's threats, the nights without food, my wife's devastating diagnosis of stage 2 breast cancer, and the crushing guilt of feeling like I had failed her. I confessed how abandoned I felt, how it seemed like my prayers hit a wall and fell back unanswered. Brother James listened quietly, never interrupting, his eyes locked on mine with an unwavering compassion. When I finished, he placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and spoke words that reached into the depths of my soul. "Son," he said, "you are seen. God knows every tear you've shed, every prayer you've whispered, and every battle you've fought. Your suffering isn't a sign of his absence. It's an invitation to trust him more deeply. Sometimes we need to align ourselves with his will to receive his blessings. The weight you carry now is not your end. It's the beginning of something greater." His words lingered in the air like a sacred echo, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, its edges frayed from years of use. He unfolded it carefully and handed it to me. "This," he said, "is no ordinary prayer. It is a prayer of divine activation, inspired by the teachings of Christ. For generations, this prayer has been passed down among those who have witnessed God's miracles firsthand. It's called the Anointed Path. These words are a key, a way to open the door to God's blessings in your life." I stared at the paper in my hands, skeptical yet intrigued. How could a few words hold such power? Brother James seemed to sense my doubt. He smiled softly and continued, "Do you remember the story of Peter walking on water? When the storm raged around him, Peter looked at the waves and began to sink. But when he turned his eyes back to Jesus, the impossible became possible. That's what this prayer does. It shifts your focus back to Christ and aligns your spirit with his divine power. It's not just the words themselves, but the faith they awaken in your heart when you pray to them." His voice grew softer, yet every word seemed to carry the weight of heaven. Think of the woman with the issue of blood. For 12 years, she suffered, rejected by society, told there was no hope. But in faith, she reached out and touched the hem of Jesus' garment, and in that instant, she was healed. This prayer is like reaching for the hem of his garment. It connects your heart to his healing power. He leaned in closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "And remember Bartimaeus, the blind beggar. When he cried out to Jesus, the crowd tried to silence him, but his faith gave him courage to cry even louder. And Jesus stopped for him, looked at him, and restored his sight." That's what this prayer ignites, a bold, unshakable trust that calls heaven's power into your life. I looked down at the paper in my hands, the handwritten words simple yet profound. There was something undeniable about them, as if they carried the very breath of God. "Pray these words daily," Brother James said, "not just with your lips, but with your heart. Speak them with faith, and you will see God's hand move in ways you never thought possible." Remember what Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. Let these words remind you that God's rest and his peace are already waiting for you. You just have to reach out in faith to receive them. Still unsure but desperate for hope, I thanked him and left the chapel with the prayer tucked in my pocket. That night, for the first time in weeks, I knelt beside my bed, unfolded the paper, and prayed the words aloud. As the final word left my lips, I felt a peace wash over me, one I hadn't felt in years. It was as if the crushing weight on my chest had been lifted. I didn't know it then, but that prayer was the spark that would ignite a series of miracles in my life. What happened next was nothing short of divine intervention. At first, the changes were subtle, like the first faint glimmers of dawn breaking after a long, dark night. A sense of peace settled over me, a calm assurance that somehow things could get better. But then the breakthroughs began faster and more powerfully than I ever could have imagined. Only 3 days after I started praying to the Anointed Path, something incredible happened. I was on my way to another job interview, one I didn't have high hopes for, when I noticed a man struggling to pick up papers he had dropped in the parking lot. Without hesitation, I stopped to help him gather them. As I handed the papers back, he looked up at me with a warm smile. "Thank you," he said. "It's rare to see people stop and help these days." We exchanged a few words, and it turned out he was the CEO of the company I was interviewing for. By the time we finished our conversation, he had already decided to hire me right there in the parking lot, and not just for the job I had applied for. He offered me a position paying 3 times my previous salary of $12,000 a month. But it didn't stop there. Over the following weeks, unexpected blessings began pouring in. One day I received a letter from the bank. Inside was a refund check for overpaid fees I hadn't even known about, $5,300. It was as if God was clearing every obstacle, wiping away every debt that had held us back. And then, out of nowhere, an old acquaintance reached out, apologizing for a loan he had never repaid. He transferred the money of $15,000 directly into my account. For the first time in years, I wasn't just out of debt. I had savings. For years, I had lived with debilitating migraines and chronic fatigue, symptoms that made even the simplest tasks feel like climbing a mountain. But after just a week of praying to the Anointed Path, I realized something miraculous. I hadn't had a single migraine. The fog of exhaustion that had hung over me for years lifted. My energy returned, and I started waking up each morning feeling alive, ready to take on the day. But the most incredible healing wasn't mine. It was my wife's. When my wife was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer, it felt like the final blow in a series of relentless storms. We couldn't afford the treatments she needed, and every day I watched her grow weaker. But as we prayed the Anointed Path together, something began to shift. At her next doctor's appointment, the oncologist reviewed her latest scans with a look of utter disbelief. "I don't know how to explain this," he said, shaking his head. "The tumor is gone, completely gone." Tears streamed down our faces as the doctor confirmed what we already knew in our hearts. God had healed her. Her strength returned, her laughter filled our home once again, and the fear that had gripped us was replaced with overwhelming gratitude. For years, our marriage had been strained under the weight of stress and fear. Arguments were a daily occurrence, and the warmth we once shared felt like a distant memory. But something happened when we began praying to the Anointed Path. The tension that had filled our home began to dissipate. Slowly but surely, we started talking again, not just about our struggles, but about our hopes and dreams. We began to laugh together, to plan for the future, and to rediscover the love that had brought us together in the first place. One evening after we had finished praying, my wife looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I feel like we've been given a second chance, not just at life, but at love." Our marriage wasn't just restored, it became a partnership rooted in faith, stronger than ever before. But the most profound transformation wasn't in our finances, health, or even our marriage. It was in our relationship with God. For years, I had treated prayer as a last resort, a desperate cry in the dark. But the Anointed Path changed everything. It wasn't just a prayer, it was a lifeline that connected me to the heart of God. As I prayed, I began to see His hand in every area of my life. The peace I felt wasn't fleeting. It was deep, unshakable, and rooted in the knowledge that His plans for me were good. One morning during my prayer time, I was drawn to a verse in the Bible that felt like it had been written just for me. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. For the first time in my life, I understood that God's love wasn't distant or conditional. It was here, now, waiting for me to receive it. The changes didn't stop with us. As I began sharing the prayer with others, their lives transformed as well. A friend who had been unemployed for nearly 2 years found a job that allowed him to support his family and pursue his passion. A cousin battling depression experienced a joy and clarity she hadn't known in years. Even strangers who heard our story and tried the prayer for themselves began sharing testimonies of their own miraculous breakthroughs. The miracles weren't coincidences. They were proof of God's promises at work, available to anyone who steps into alignment with Him through the anointed path. And it all began with a simple prayer. This isn't just my story, it could be yours too. God's blessings are waiting for you, just as they were for me. All it takes is faith and the willingness to step onto the path He has laid out for you. The anointed path is not just a prayer, it's a divine invitation to align your life with God's promises of abundance, healing, and joy. Rooted in Scripture and inspired by the teachings of Christ, this sacred practice is a spiritual key that opens the door to the miraculous. This prayer isn't about simply reciting words. It's about igniting a faith so deep, it calls heaven's blessings down into every area of your life. From curing illnesses deemed incurable, to restoring relationships, to unlocking financial breakthroughs that once seemed impossible, the anointed path is your roadmap to the life God has always intended for you. Unlike anything you've tried before, the anointed path is not a self-help method, a ritual, or a quick fix. It's a faith-driven alignment with God's will, allowing His power to flow freely into your life. This prayer carries the weight of heaven itself. Its simplicity belies the profound miracles it can unleash, transforming brokenness into wholeness, scarcity and abundance, and despair into joy. When you embrace the anointed path, you'll gain access to the same life-changing prayer that transformed my life, a prayer that has been passed down through generations of believers who have experienced God's miraculous hand in their lives. Healing for the incurable doctors may call it impossible, but with God, nothing is impossible. This prayer has been the catalyst for healing illnesses that medical experts could not cure, illnesses like stage 2 breast cancer, debilitating chronic pain, and countless other conditions. Lives that once seemed beyond hope have been completely restored by the power of God through the anointed path. Unleashing riches beyond measure. The anointed path opens the floodgates of financial blessings. From unexpected job opportunities to miraculous debt cancellations, those who pray this prayer have experienced financial transformations that defy logic. It's not about greed, it's about stepping into the abundance God has promised His children, so you can live a life of generosity and purpose, renewing and restoring relationships. Strained marriages, broken friendships, and disconnected families have been healed through this prayer. The anointed path fosters forgiveness, understanding, and unity, strengthening bonds that once seemed beyond repair. Imagine your relationships blooming with love and trust like never before, a deeper connection with God. Above all else, the anointed path leads you closer to God. It's not just about receiving blessings, it's about experiencing His presence, His love, and His guidance in ways that transform your entire being. When you pray to the anointed path, you're doing more than asking for blessings. You're aligning your spirit with God's divine will, allowing Him to move mountains on your behalf. The changes you'll see won't just be temporary fixes. They'll be lasting, life-changing transformations that touch every part of your life. If you're ready to experience healing in your body and soul, break free from financial struggles, restore and strengthen your relationships, and deepen your connection with God, then the anointed path is for you. This prayer has worked miracles in my life and in the lives of countless others. Now it's your turn. Are you ready to take the first step? The fact that you are still here, reading these words, is no accident. It's not by chance that you've stayed with me this long. Deep down, you know this moment is different. You've been praying for answers, asking God for a breakthrough, and now He's leading you here right now. The truth is, The very reason you've stayed this far is because you're ready. You're tired of carrying the burdens that have weighed you down, and you've decided it's time to let go and let God. Whether you realize it or not, you've already begun to accept His help. That quiet stirring in your heart, that's Him calling you to take this step of faith. This isn't just a coincidence, it's divine timing. Think about how many times you've prayed for a sign, asking God to guide you. How many times have you whispered, "Lord, show me the way," only to feel unsure of what to do next? This is that sign. This is God opening a door for you, inviting you to step onto the path He has prepared. This isn't about chance, it's about God's perfect plan unfolding in your life. Click the button below to join the anointed path today. Take this step of faith and experience the miracles God has in store for you. The fact that you're still here, reading these words, shows you're not like everyone else. You haven't given up. You haven't let fear or doubt stop you. You're determined to see God's hand move in your life, and you're ready to align yourself with His will. Let me be absolutely clear. I don't take a single cent for this prayer. Why? Because I don't need to. God has already blessed me beyond measure, and my riches don't come from the things of this world. They come from the abundance of His grace. Every single dollar contributed is used to fulfill God's work, planting trees to restore His creation, delivering food to the hungry, and spreading His love to those who feel forgotten. This isn't about personal gain. It's about becoming the hands and feet of Christ in a world that desperately needs His touch. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. Your presence here is proof that God is already working in your life. Will you take the next step and say yes to His promises? This isn't just about improving one area of your life. It's about total transformation. Your finances, health, relationships, and spiritual walk, all of it can be touched by God's hand. Join the anointed path now and discover the miracles waiting for you. Let today be the day you say yes to His promises. Don't let this divine opportunity pass you by. Trust Him, take the step, and watch what He will do in your life.